Welcome to Stories of Slavery. I'm glad you're here. The story we're sharing today centers on Esther May, an elderly black woman who, after 3 decades in bondage, finally walks free and returns to the home she held in her heart all those years. But the moment she crosses the threshold, she comes face to face with someone who alters everything. This is a powerful and heavy narrative, so I invite you to take a breath, settle in, and listen closely. Before we go any further, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment letting us know which city and country you're tuning in from. Your voice matters, it helps us keep these histories alive instead of letting them fade away. Now, let's begin. She stepped out of that cotton field with nothing but a creased piece of paper and a name she had not spoken aloud in 30 years. Esther May Whitfield had reached 62 years of age when freedom finally caught up with her. Her first response was to drop to her knees and weep. It wasn't happiness or relief that brought the tears. It was the crushing weight of everything stolen from her, along with the terrifying uncertainty of what, if anything, still remained. Because 3 decades isn't merely a stretch of time. 30 years is an entire lifetime. It's children growing into adults without you. It's a husband aging without you by his side. It's a home transforming into a memory so fragile you start to question if it was ever truly real. When Esther May pushed herself up from the Georgia soil on April 14, 1865, 5 days following General Lee's surrender at Appomattox, a single thought consumed her. Home. She was going back to it. What waited for her there would challenge everything she understood about family, about loyalty, and about just how deep human betrayal can go. But we're not there yet. First, you need to understand how Esther May Whitfield came to be in that cotton field at all. Let's go back to 1835. Andrew Jackson sat in the White House. The Trail of Tears was forcing Cherokee people off their ancestral lands. And in a modest place called Ridgewood, roughly 40 miles north of Savannah, Georgia, an unlikely community of free black people was flourishing. They called it Freeman's Settlement, though you wouldn't find it on any government map. Around 200 people made their home there. They were free people of color, some born into freedom, others who had purchased their liberty or been released by their owners. Esther May entered the world there in 1803. Her parents, Solomon and Ruth Whitfield, had spent 17 long years buying their way out of slavery. Solomon worked as a blacksmith. Ruth took in laundry from white families in nearby towns. They weren't rich, but they were free. In that era and in that place, freedom was more precious than any amount of gold. Growing up, Esther May understood the deep value of that freedom. When she was 7, a traveling preacher passing through Freeman's Settlement taught her to read. Her mother, who had secretly taught herself during her own years of bondage, taught her to write. By the time she turned 16, Esther May had become the most educated woman in the settlement. She maintained records for the community, penned letters for those who couldn't write, and held onto a dream of one day opening her own school. In 1825, at age 22, she married a carpenter named Thomas Greer. He was a skilled, dependable man whose hands could shape rough timber into elegant furniture. Together, they built a small home on the outskirts of Freeman's Settlement, 2 rooms with a front porch and a garden in back. Esther May lined the fence with pink roses, the kind that reminded her of the flowers her mother used to tend. They had 2 children, a daughter named Pearl in 1827 and a son named Isaiah in 1830. Life demanded hard work, but it was good. Esther May believed she knew what happiness meant. Then came the night of September 3, 1835. Esther May was 32. Pearl was 8. Isaiah was 5. Thomas had gone to Savannah to deliver some chairs to a wealthy merchant, a trip expected to take 3 days. He was scheduled to return the following morning. Esther May tucked the children in, checked the locks twice, and sat by the fire in her chair to wait. She never heard them approach. The first sign of trouble was the front door splintering open and men's voices filling her home. 4 white men burst in, carrying torches and rope, their faces twisted with a hatred she had never personally experienced before. She fought back, she screamed, she clawed. She threw herself between the men and her children. But she was one woman against 4, and they had no intention of being stopped. They dragged her out of the house. They dragged Pearl and Isaiah out behind her. And as Esther May watched, frozen, unable to move or breathe or do anything but scream, they set her home on fire. The roses burned along with everything else. What followed was part of a practice history would later call kidnapping into slavery. Free black people, especially those without influential white allies, were easy targets. Slave catchers would create false documents claiming their victims were fugitives. Local authorities, often complicit or simply indifferent, didn't look too closely. And the free person would disappear into the machinery of bondage, their protests meaningless, their freedom papers destroyed or labeled forgeries. Esther May had her freedom papers. She showed them to anyone who would listen during the 3-day journey south. But those papers meant nothing to men who had already decided her value. On September 7, 1835, Esther May Whitfield, Pearl Greer, and Isaiah Greer went up for auction at a private sale in Valdosta, Georgia. Esther May sold for $400. Pearl, young and healthy, brought $300. Isaiah, just 5 years old, went for $250. They were purchased by 3 different buyers. Esther never laid eyes on her children again. The man who bought Esther was named Cornelius Blackwood. He operated a cotton plantation called Magnolia Grove about 60 miles southwest of Valdosta, near the Florida line. 800 acres of rich cotton land worked by 123 enslaved people. Cornelius Blackwood wasn't the harshest master in Georgia. He wasn't the kindest either. He was simply a man who viewed human beings as equipment, tools meant to be used until they broke and then thrown away. Esther May got sent to the fields. It made no difference that she could read and write. It didn't matter that she had managed a household, kept books, taught children. All that counted was that she had sturdy arms and a sturdy back, and cotton didn't pick itself. For the first 5 years, Esther May attempted escape. 4 times, to be exact. The first try got her 15 miles before the dogs caught up. 30 lashes. The second time she reached the Suwannee River before a patrol grabbed her. 40 lashes. The third attempt ended before it even started. A fellow enslaved person, hoping for the small rewards betrayal might bring, turned her in. 50 lashes. The fourth time, in 1840, she made it almost to Savannah, almost to the docks, almost to a ship that might have carried her north. She was caught on the waterfront by a man who spotted the brand on her arm. The letter B that Cornelius Blackwood burned into all his property after that first escape attempt. 60 lashes, and something far worse. Cornelius Blackwood sold her husband. Thomas Greer had spent 5 years searching. He used every penny he earned, called in every favor owed, visited every slave market from Georgia to Louisiana, hunting for his wife and children. He finally traced Esther May to Magnolia Grove. He had been making careful plans to buy her freedom or steal her back. But someone talked. Someone always talked. Cornelius Blackwood, upon learning his troublesome slave had a free husband trying to liberate her, decided to make an example. He contacted a slave trader in New Orleans. Within a month, Thomas Greer had been kidnapped, just like his family before him. His freedom papers destroyed, his protests ignored. Esther May heard through the whispered networks linking plantation to plantation that her husband had been sold to a sugar plantation in Louisiana. She never learned which one. She never saw Thomas again. After that, Esther May stopped trying to run. Not because hope had died. Hope had become a luxury she couldn't afford. She stopped because she realized each escape attempt made someone else pay. The first few times, it was her own back. The fourth time, it cost her husband everything. If she tried again, who would suffer next? The older woman who had taken her in during those first brutal months. The young mother who shared her cabin and her food. The children who looked at her with eyes that cut too close to Pearl and Isaiah. Esther May made a decision. She would survive. She would endure. She would wait. Freedom would come eventually, whether through death or deliverance. Until then, she would keep her head low and her eyes wide open. 25 years passed. A quarter-century of cotton and sweat and pain. Esther watched the seasons turn. Watched crops flourish and fail and flourish again. She watched Cornelius Blackwood age and die in 1852. She watched his son, Marcus Blackwood, take control of the plantation. Marcus was worse than his father. Where Cornelius had been cold, Marcus was vicious. Where Cornelius had seen his slaves as property, Marcus seemed to view them as subhuman, creatures placed on earth purely for his entertainment and torment. The whippings became more frequent. The food portions shrank. Work hours stretched from before sunrise to well after dark. Esther May was 50 when Marcus Blackwood took over. Her back was a lattice of scars. Her hands were rough and gnarled. Her hair, once thick and black, had turned completely gray. But she survived. She always survived. Then came the war. Esther May heard about Fort Sumter from a house slave who overheard the Blackwoods discussing it over dinner. April 1861. The Confederacy had fired on the federal fort in Charleston Harbor. Lincoln was calling for troops. War had begun. For the next 4 years, Esther May listened. She absorbed every whisper, every rumor, every bit of news that trickled down to the slave quarters. She heard about Bull Run and Antietam, about Shiloh and Gettysburg. She heard about the Emancipation Proclamation in January 1863, though it meant nothing at Magnolia Grove, where the overseer just laughed when someone mentioned it. She heard about Sherman's march to the sea in late 1864, about destruction spreading across Georgia like holy fire. And she heard, on that April morning in 1865, that the war was finished. Lee had surrendered. The Confederacy was done. She was free. Marcus Blackwood didn't inform his slaves they were free. He had no intention of doing so. As far as he was concerned, the war was a temporary inconvenience, and things would return to normal soon enough. But the Union soldiers who arrived at Magnolia Grove on April 14, 1865 had other plans. About 24 of them showed up. A scouting party from Sherman's forces, their blue uniforms dusty and expressions hardened. They rode to the main house, demanded to see the owner, and informed Marcus Blackwood, in no uncertain terms, that his human property no longer belonged to him. Esther May was in the fields when freedom arrived. She was 62 years old, bent from decades of labor, her body a roadmap of suffering. A young soldier, barely 19, rode out to where she worked and told her she was free. Just like that. "You're free now, ma'am. You can go wherever you like." She dropped to her knees and wept. The soldier, clearly uncomfortable with such raw emotion, handed her a piece of paper. It was a document from the Freedmen's Bureau explaining her rights as a newly freed person. Esther May read it 3 times, struggling to believe the words in front of her. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it into her dress, and stood up. She was going home. But first, questions haunted her. Questions that had lingered for 30 years. What became of Pearl? What became of Isaiah? And what happened to the people she left behind in Freeman Settlement, the community that had been her entire world before it was stolen? The young soldier who delivered her freedom was named Samuel Harding, from a small town in Massachusetts. He showed her kindness, more than he needed to an old woman he didn't know. When Esther explained where she needed to go, he arranged for her to travel with a supply wagon heading north toward Savannah. From there, she would have to find her own way to Ridgewood and Freeman Settlement. "It's probably not the same as you remember," Samuel warned her. "A lot has changed in 30 years. Esther May knew that. She knew it better than anyone. But she had to witness it for herself. She had to know. The journey from Magnolia Grove to Ridgewood took nearly 3 weeks. The roads were chaos, filled with refugees, soldiers, and newly freed people trying to understand what freedom even meant. Esther May walked when she had to, rode when she could, slept wherever she found shelter. She was 62 years old, and her body protested every step. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Home was calling, and she had been away far too long. She reached Ridgewood on May 5, 1865. The town itself had changed, grown larger and more prosperous during her decades away. But she wasn't interested in Ridgewood. She wanted what lay beyond it. The small community where she was born, where she married, where she raised her children before they were stolen. Freeman Settlement should have been about 2 miles north of town, following the old creek road. Esther May remembered every turn, every landmark, every tree along that path. She had walked it 1,000 times in her dreams during those 30 years of bondage. But as she walked that road now, something felt wrong. The trees looked different. The landmarks had vanished. And where Freeman Settlement should have stood, there was nothing. Nothing except cotton fields stretching endlessly. She stopped a man on the road, a black man around her age, and asked what had happened to Freeman Settlement. The man looked at her with confusion, then with something like pity. Freeman's settlement, he repeated. That's been gone for years, ma'am. 30 years at least. The white folks burned it out back in 35. Said the free coloreds were causing trouble, helping runaways and such. They drove everyone out, killed a few, sold the rest into slavery. Ain't nothing left now but fields. Esther May felt the ground shift beneath her. Burned out. Driven away. Killed. Sold into slavery. Her entire community destroyed in the same attack that had taken her and her children. She had always assumed some of them escaped, that some piece of her home had survived. But there was nothing. Nothing but cotton growing where her people used to live. The man, whose name was Benjamin, took pity on her. He could see she was old and exhausted, and whatever news he had just delivered had broken something inside her. He offered to take her to his home, give her a place to rest, a meal to eat. His wife Clara was a good woman. She would help. Esther May accepted. She didn't know what else to do. Benjamin's home was a small cabin about a mile from where Freeman's settlement used to be. He and Clara were former slaves themselves, freed just weeks ago when Union soldiers came through. They were trying to build a life on a small plot of land no one seemed to claim anymore, growing vegetables and hoping for the best. Over dinner that night, Esther May told them her story. The kidnapping. The auction. The 30 years at Magnolia Grove. The children she had lost. By the time she finished, Clara was crying, and Benjamin stared at his plate with the expression of a man who had heard too many stories like this one. There's something you should know, Benjamin said slowly, not meeting Esther May's eyes. Something about this land. About who owns it now. Esther May looked at him. What do you mean? After Freeman's settlement was burned out, Benjamin explained, the land was divided up and sold. Most of it went to a man named Jeremiah Cotton. He's the biggest landowner in the county now. Owns about 2,000 acres. All of it worked by slaves until last month. His plantation house is about 3 miles east of here. Esther May nodded. She didn't see what this had to do with her. Then Benjamin said something that turned her blood to ice. The thing is, ma'am, Benjamin continued, his voice barely a whisper, Jeremiah Cotton didn't buy that land himself. He was too young back then, just a boy. His mother bought it. And his mother, well, his mother was a woman from Freeman's settlement. A free-colored woman who somehow didn't get burned out or sold with the rest. Esther May couldn't breathe. What was her name, she asked. This woman. What was her name? Benjamin looked at her with those pitying eyes again. Her name was Ruth, he said. Ruth Whitfield. The world went dark around the edges. Ruth Whitfield. Her mother. Her mother, who should have been 55 when Freeman's settlement was destroyed. Her mother, who should have been taken in the attack, just like everyone else. Her mother, who apparently wasn't taken at all but had somehow survived, somehow thrived, somehow ended up owning the very land where her daughter's community once stood. But that was impossible. Ruth Whitfield had died in 1832, 3 years before the attack on Freeman's settlement. Esther May had attended her funeral. She had helped dig the grave. You must be mistaken, Esther May said, her voice shaking. Ruth Whitfield is dead. She's been dead for 33 years. Benjamin shook his head slowly. I don't know about that, ma'am. All I know is what folks around here say. The woman who bought that land, who married a white man named William Cotton, and had a son named Jeremiah, she called herself Ruth Whitfield, and she came from Freeman's settlement. Esther May sat in silence for a long time. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Ruth Whitfield was dead. She knew that. She was certain of that. But someone claiming to be Ruth Whitfield had survived the attack on Freeman's settlement, had acquired land, had married a white man, had built a dynasty on the ashes of everything Esther May had lost. Who? And how? And why? There was only one way to find out. She had to go to the cotton plantation. She had to see this woman, or whoever had taken her mother's name. She had to understand. I need to go there, Esther May said. To the cotton place. I need to see this for myself. Benjamin and Clara exchanged worried looks. Ma'am, Benjamin said carefully, that might not be a good idea. Jeremiah Cotton is not a kind man. He didn't take well to losing his slaves. Word is he's been threatening anyone who sets foot on his property. I don't care, Esther May said. I've survived 30 years of slavery. I've lost my husband, my children, my home, my entire community. I have nothing left to fear. I need to know the truth. She set out the next morning, walking east along the dirt roads winding through the Georgia countryside. The cotton plantation sat exactly where Benjamin had said it would, about 3 miles from his cabin. As Esther May approached, she spotted the big house rising from the cotton fields, a white-columned mansion that looked like something from a picture book. It was beautiful in the way terrible things can sometimes be beautiful. Built on stolen land and stolen labor, a monument to cruelty dressed up in fine architecture. She walked up the long drive toward the main house. Field workers, mostly black, stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Some looked confused, others worried. A few looked like they wanted to warn her away but didn't dare speak. Esther May kept walking. She climbed the steps to the front porch and knocked on the door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and a white man appeared. He was about 40, with cold blue eyes and a face that seemed permanently set in an expression of contempt. He looked Esther May up and down, taking in her worn clothes, gray hair, stooped posture. "What do you want?" he demanded. His voice was sharp, impatient, the voice of a man unaccustomed to being approached by people like her. "I'm looking for Ruth Whitfield," Esther May said. "I was told she lives here." The man's expression shifted. Something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been surprise or fear or both. "Who are you?" he asked. "Why are you asking about her?" "My name is Esther May Whitfield," she said. "Ruth Whitfield was my mother, and she died 33 years ago. So I want to know who's been using her name." The man stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "You'd better come inside," he said. "There's someone you need to meet." The inside of the cotton plantation house matched the promise of the outside. Fine furniture, expensive paintings, crystal chandeliers. Esther May walked through rooms worth more than everything she had ever owned in her entire life, following the man who introduced himself as Jeremiah Cotton. He led her to a parlor at the back of the house where a woman sat in a chair by the window. The woman was old, very old. Her hair was white, her skin paper-thin, and her hands trembled as they rested in her lap. But her eyes were sharp and clear. And when she looked up at Esther, those eyes filled with something that might have been recognition. "Mother," Jeremiah said, "there's someone here to see you." The old woman looked at Esther May. Esther May looked at the old woman. And in that moment, Esther May felt the world shift beneath her feet for the second time in 2 days. Because she knew that face. She knew those eyes. She had grown up seeing them every day, had loved them, had trusted them, had believed in them with all her heart. But the face did not belong to Ruth Whitfield. The face belonged to someone else entirely. Someone Esther May had never expected to see again. Someone who should have been sold alongside her on that terrible day in September 1835. The old woman smiled. It was a cold smile, a calculating smile, a smile that held 30 years of secrets. "Hello, Esther May," the woman said. "It's been a long time." And Esther May, standing in the parlor of a plantation built on stolen land and stolen lives, finally understood. She finally understood everything. The woman in the chair was not her mother. The woman in the chair was her sister. Her younger sister, Naomi, who had been 17 years old when Freeman's settlement was attacked. Naomi, who Esther May had assumed was either killed or sold into slavery along with everyone else. Naomi, who had apparently survived. More than survived. Naomi had thrived. She had taken their mother's name. She had married a white man. She had built an empire on the ashes of her own people. And suddenly, terribly, Esther understood something else. She understood who had betrayed Freeman's settlement in the first place. She understood who had told those men where to find them, when to attack, who to target. She understood why Naomi had survived when everyone else had been killed or sold. Because Naomi had made a deal. Naomi had sold her own people for her own freedom. And Esther May, her own sister, had been part of the price. "You," Esther whispered. "It was you." Naomi's smile didn't waver. She looked at her sister with those sharp, cold eyes and said the words that would haunt Esther May for the rest of her life. "Sit down," she said. "We have much to discuss." Esther May didn't sit down. She couldn't sit down. Her legs had turned to stone, her blood to ice, and every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. She stood in the middle of that fine parlor, surrounded by wealth built on betrayal, staring at the woman who had once been her baby sister. Naomi Whitfield had been 17 in 1835. The youngest of 3 children, the baby of the family, the one everyone protected and spoiled and loved. She had been beautiful back then, with their mother's high cheekbones and their father's quick smile. She had been clever too. Clever in ways Esther May had admired but never fully understood. Now she was 80, withered and white-haired. But those clever eyes hadn't changed. They still held that same calculating intelligence, that same cold assessment of everyone and everything around her. "I said, sit down," Naomi repeated. Her voice was stronger than her frail appearance suggested. "You look like you're about to fall over, and I don't want you dying on my floor before I've had a chance to explain." "Explain." Esther May's voice cracked on the word. "Explain. You sold us, Naomi. You sold your own family. You sold your own people. What could you possibly explain?" Naomi sighed, the sigh of someone who had been waiting a long time for this conversation and was tired of waiting. "I did what I had to do to survive," she said simply. "Just like you did. Just like everyone does. The only difference is that I was better at it." Jeremiah Cotton, who had been standing by the door watching this exchange with growing unease, stepped forward. "Mother," he said, his voice uncertain. "What is she talking about? What does she mean, you sold your own family?" Naomi waved a dismissive hand. "Not now, Jeremiah. This is between me and my sister. Go check on the fields or something. Make yourself useful." "Sister." Jeremiah's face went pale. "You told me your family was dead. You told me you were the only survivor of that settlement." "I told you what you needed to hear," Naomi said sharply. "Now leave us. This doesn't concern you." Jeremiah looked like he wanted to argue, but something in his mother's eyes stopped him. He glanced at Esther May, then back at Naomi, then turned and left the room without another word. Esther May heard his footsteps retreating down the hall, heard a door slam somewhere in the distance. Then there was silence. Naomi gestured to a chair across from her. "Now, will you sit? My neck hurts from looking up at you." Esther didn't move. "Tell me what happened," she said. "Tell me everything." Naomi was quiet for a moment, studying her sister's face. Then she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "I suppose you've earned that much. But don't interrupt me. This is a long story, and I don't have the patience to tell it twice." She settled back in her chair, her gaze drifting to the window, to the cotton field stretching out beyond the glass. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was softer now, almost dreamy, like she was talking about something that had happened to someone else a long time ago. "It started in the summer of 1835, Naomi began. A few months before the attack. I was 17 and I was in love. His name was William Cotton. He was the son of one of the wealthiest planters in the county. White, of course. Handsome as sin. And he wanted me." Esther May felt her stomach turn. She remembered William Cotton. She remembered him as a young man with cruel eyes and a crueler smile. The kind of men who looked at black women like objects to be used and discarded. He had come to Freeman's settlement a few times, supposedly to buy furniture from Thomas, but Esther had always felt uneasy around him. "We met in secret," Naomi continued. 4 months. He told me he loved me. He told me he would marry me. He told me he would take me away from Freeman's settlement and give me the life I deserved. And I believed him. I believed every word." Her voice hardened. "But then I found out the truth. William didn't want to marry me. He couldn't marry me. Not legally, not in Georgia. What he wanted was something else entirely. He wanted me to be his kept woman, his mistress, hidden away on some back corner of his father's property where no one would see. And when I said no, when I told him I wanted more than that, he got angry." Naomi turned to look at Esther May. And for the first time, something like pain showed in her eyes. He told me that if I didn't agree to his terms, he would destroy everything I loved. He would burn Freeman's settlement to the ground. He would sell every person in it, including my own family. And he had the power to do it. His father had connections with the slave catchers, with the local militia, with everyone who mattered in that county. Esther May's hands were shaking. "So you agreed," she said. "You agreed to help him destroy us." "I agreed to survive," Naomi snapped. "What would you have done?" "Let him burn us all anyway." "At least this way, I had some control. At least this way, I could save myself." "Save yourself?" Esther May's voice rose. "You didn't just save yourself, Naomi. You profited. You got rich. You built all of this on our bones." Naomi didn't flinch. "Yes," she said simply. "I did." The silence that followed was deafening. Esther May could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could feel the rage building inside her like a fire that wanted to consume everything in its path. But she forced herself to stay still, to keep listening. She needed to know all of it. Every terrible detail. "What happened that night?" Esther May asked. "The night they came for us. Tell me exactly what happened." Naomi's gaze returned to the window. "It was September 3rd, she said. "I remember because there was a full moon. William had given me instructions. I was supposed to unlock the back gate of the settlement, the one that led to the creek road. I was supposed to make sure no one was watching. And I was supposed to stay hidden until it was over." She paused, her jaw tightening. "I did everything he asked. I unlocked the gate. I hid in the root cellar behind Solomon's forge. And I listened while they burned everything. I listened to the screaming, the gunshots, the sound of our people being dragged from their homes. I listened and I did nothing." Esther May closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, she could see it all. The flames, the chaos, the terror on her children's faces as they were torn from her arms. 30 years, and the memory was still as sharp as a knife. "What about Mama and Papa?" Esther May asked. "What happened to them?" Naomi was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Papa tried to fight," she said. "He grabbed his hammer and went after one of the men. They shot him in the chest. He died before he hit the ground. And Mama? Mama saw him fall. She ran to him, tried to hold him, tried to stop the bleeding. One of the men hit her with the butt of his rifle. She never got up again." Esther May felt tears streaming down her face, but she made no move to wipe them away. "So they died," she said. "Our parents died, and you just hid in a cellar and let it happen. What was I supposed to do?" Naomi demanded. "Die with them. What good would that have done?" "You could have warned us," Esther May said. "You could have told us what was coming. We could have run. We could have fought. We could have done something. And then William would have killed me too," Naomi said flatly. "He made that very clear. If I breathed a word to anyone, I would burn with the rest of you." I believed him. I still believe him. Esther May opened her eyes and looked at her sister. She saw an old woman, frail and withered, clinging to justifications that had kept her conscience quiet for 30 years. She saw a survivor, yes, but she also saw a monster. "What happened after?" Esther asked. "After the attack. How did you end up here?" Naomi shifted in her chair, wincing slightly as if the movement caused her pain. "William kept his promise," she said. "He hid me on his family's property for a few months until the attention died down. Then he married me quietly, secretly, in a ceremony that no court in Georgia would have recognized. But it was enough for him. It was enough for me." "How?" Esther demanded. "How could you marry the men who murdered our parents, who sold our people into slavery?" "Because he had power," Naomi said simply. "And power was the only thing that mattered. Power was the only thing that could keep me safe." She leaned forward, her eyes suddenly intense. "Do you think I enjoyed it?" she asked. "Do you think I loved him? I hated William Cotton with every fiber of my being. Every night I spent in his bed, I wanted to kill him. But I endured it. I endured it because the alternative was worse. The alternative was being free, Esther May said bitterly. The alternative was being human. Naomi laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. Free. Human. Those are pretty words, Esther May. But they don't mean anything when you're a black woman in Georgia. I saw what happened to free black people. I saw what happened to our community. Freedom was an illusion. The only real protection was power, and the only way to get power was to take it from the people who had it. So you took it, Esther May said. You took everything. I took what I could, Naomi agreed. When William's father died in 1840, William inherited everything. And when William died in 1852, I inherited it from him. The land, the money, the slaves, all of it. And I used it to build something that would last. She gestured around the room at the fine furniture and expensive paintings. This is my legacy, she said. This is what I built from nothing. From the ashes of Freeman's settlement, I built an empire. An empire built on slavery, Esther May said. An empire built on the suffering of your own people. Everyone's empire is built on suffering, Naomi said. The only question is whose suffering you're willing to tolerate. Esther May stared at her sister for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her chest since she walked through that door. What happened to my children, Naomi? What happened to Pearl and Isaiah? Naomi's expression flickered. Something crossed her face, something that might have been guilt or might have been fear. I don't know, she said. They were sold at auction in Valdosta. I wasn't there. I don't know who bought them. You're lying. Esther May said. She could feel it. The same instinct that had failed her 30 years ago but was screaming at her now. You know something. Tell me. Naomi was silent. Her hands resting on her lap had begun to tremble. Tell me, Esther May repeated. Her voice was still now, cold and hard. Tell me what happened to my children, or I swear to God, Naomi, I will burn this house down around you. Naomi looked at her sister. For the first time since Esther May had entered the room, she looked afraid. All right, she said quietly. I'll tell you. But you won't like it. She took a deep breath. Pearl was sold to a man named Henderson, she said. A planter from South Carolina. I heard she died of fever about 10 years later. She would have been 18. Esther May felt something crack inside her chest. Pearl, her firstborn, her daughter, dead at 18, alone and enslaved far from everyone who loved her. And Isaiah. Esther May whispered. Naomi's face twisted. Isaiah, she repeated. Isaiah was different. What do you mean, different? The buyer who purchased Isaiah at that auction, Naomi said slowly. It was William. William Cotton. He bought your son. The room tilted. Esther May grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. William thought it would be amusing, Naomi said. A cruel joke. He brought Isaiah here, to this plantation, and he raised him as a house slave. He made Isaiah serve him at dinner, dress him in the morning, attend to his every need. And he made sure Isaiah knew who he really was. He told him about Freeman's settlement, about his family, about everything. He used it to torture him. Esther May couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Her son, her Isaiah, had been here, on this very plantation, serving the men who had destroyed their lives. And Naomi had known. Naomi had let it happen. Where is he now? Esther May asked. Her voice was barely audible. Where is Isaiah? Naomi wouldn't meet her eyes. He's dead, she said. He died in 1858. He was 28 years old. How? Naomi was silent for a long moment. Then she said, he tried to run. William caught him. And William made an example of him. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Esther May stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but absorb the horror of what she was hearing. Her son had been here. Her son had suffered here. Her son had died here. And her own sister had watched it happen. You knew, Esther May finally said. You knew my son was here. You knew he was being tortured. And you did nothing. What could I have done? Naomi demanded. William was my husband. He owned everything, including me. If I had tried to help Isaiah, William would have killed us both. You could have told me, Esther said. When you came to visit me in prison. You could have told me my son was alive. You could have given me that much. Naomi blinked. Prison? What prison? I never visited you in prison. Esther May stared at her. But then who? She began and stopped. The pieces were falling into place now. Terrible pieces of a terrible puzzle. Naomi had never visited her. Naomi had never known where she was because Naomi had assumed, just like everyone else, that Esther May had been sold to some distant plantation where she would work until she died. Naomi had never expected her to survive. Naomi had never expected her to come back. You thought I was dead? Esther May said slowly. All these years, you thought I was dead. I thought you were gone, Naomi corrected. I didn't think about it much, to be honest. I had other things to worry about. Other things. Esther May wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. She wanted to wrap her hands around her sister's throat and squeeze until those clever eyes went dark. But she did none of those things. Instead, she asked one more question. Why did you take Mama's name? Naomi almost smiled. Because Ruth Whitfield was a free woman of color, she said. Her papers were in order. Her history was clean. When William and I needed to create a new identity for me, someone who could legally own property and conduct business, Ruth Whitfield was perfect. No one knew she was dead. No one asked too many questions. You erased her, Esther said. You stole her name and erased everything she was. I honored her, Naomi said. I gave her name power. I made it mean something. You made it mean nothing, Esther May said. You turned our mother's name into a lie. Everything is a lie, Naomi said. The only question is which lies help you survive. Esther May looked at her sister for a long moment. She saw an old woman, yes, a frail woman, a dying woman from the look of her. But she also saw something else. She saw the 17-year-old girl who had unlocked that gate. She saw the woman who had married her parents' murderer. She saw the monster who had watched her nephew suffer and die without lifting a finger to help. And she saw something that Naomi probably didn't even see in herself. She saw fear. Naomi had spent 30 years building walls around herself, accumulating power and wealth and protection. But underneath all of it, she was still terrified, still running from the night she had betrayed everyone who loved her. You're dying, Esther May said. It wasn't a question. She could see it in Naomi's face, in the yellow tinge of her skin, in the way she held herself like every movement was painful. Naomi nodded slowly. Liver, she said. The doctor gives me a few months. Maybe less. Good, Esther May said. The word hung in the air between them. Naomi's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't protest. Perhaps she knew she deserved it. Perhaps she was too tired to argue. I'm not going to forgive you, Esther May continued. I want you to understand that. Whatever happens next, whatever you say, I will never forgive you for what you did. Not to me. Not to Pearl and Isaiah. Not to our parents. Not to our people. I never asked for forgiveness, Naomi said. I never wanted it. I know, Esther May said. That's the saddest part. You don't even understand what you lost. She turned and walked toward the door. Behind her, she heard Naomi's voice, weaker now, almost pleading. What are you going to do? Esther May stopped but didn't turn around. I'm going to live, she said. Something you never learned how to do. She walked out of the parlor, out of the house, out into the Georgia sunshine. The cotton fields stretched out around her, endless rows of white bowls that would soon be picked by the same hands that had picked them for generations. But something had changed. The people in those fields were free now. Free to leave, free to stay, free to build something new on the ruins of the old. Esther May walked down the long drive, away from the cotton plantation, away from the sister who had stolen everything from her. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what she would do next. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was not going to let Naomi's betrayal define her. She had lost her husband, her children, her parents, her community, 30 years of her life. She had lost everything. But she was still standing. She was still breathing. She was still alive. And that, in the end, was the only victory that mattered. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of Esther May's life. She returned to Benjamin and Clara's cabin, where they welcomed her without question. She told them what she had learned, the truth about Naomi, the truth about Freeman's settlement, the truth about everything. They listened in horror, then in anger, then in a kind of sad resignation that seemed to say they had heard stories like this before. Word spread quickly through the community of freed people who were slowly beginning to gather in the area. Former slaves from nearby plantations, people looking for lost family members, wanderers trying to figure out what freedom even meant. They came to hear Esther May's story. They came to understand what had happened to Freeman's settlement. And they came to decide what to do about it. There was talk of revenge, of course. Some of the younger men wanted to march on the cotton plantation and burn it to the ground, just as Freeman's settlement had been burned. But Esther May stopped them. "Burning won't bring back the dead," she said. "It won't give us back what we lost. All it will do is give them an excuse to come after us again." "Then what do we do?" a young woman asked. "Just let her get away with it." Esther May thought for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "We don't let her get away with it. But we fight her the right way. We tell the truth. We make sure everyone knows what she did. And we build something new, something better, on the land she stole from us." It wasn't a satisfying answer. Revenge would have been satisfying. But Esther May had learned something in those 30 years of slavery. She had learned that hatred was a chain just like any other. It could bind you just as tightly as iron shackles. And she refused to be bound anymore. In June of 1865, Esther May did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She walked back to the cotton plantation and asked to speak with Jeremiah Cotton. Not Naomi. Jeremiah, the son who had grown up believing his mother was someone she was not. The man who was about to inherit an empire built on lies. Jeremiah received her in his study, a small room lined with books and smelling of tobacco. He looked different than he had the first time they met. Older somehow, more tired. The revelations about his mother had clearly taken their toll. "Why are you here?" he asked. His voice was not hostile, just weary. "I'm here to make you an offer," Esther said. "What kind of offer?" "The land your mother stole from Freeman's settlement," Esther May said. "I want it back." Jeremiah laughed, a short bitter sound. "You want me to give you my land?" "Not give," Esther May said. "Sell. Fair price. I've been talking to people. Former slaves who have money saved up. Freed people who are looking for a place to start over. We can put together enough to buy the land where Freeman's settlement used to be. About 200 acres, by my count." Jeremiah stared at her. "You're serious?" "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." There was a long silence. Jeremiah looked out the window at his fields, at the empire his mother had built on blood and betrayal. "And why should I sell to you?" he finally asked. "Why should I help the woman who's trying to destroy my family's legacy?" "Because your family's legacy is a lie," Esther said simply. "Because your mother murdered innocent people and stole everything they had. And because you're not her. You can be different. You can do something right." Jeremiah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My mother is dying." "I know. She won't last the month." "I know that too." "If I sell you that land," Jeremiah said slowly, "she'll die knowing that everything she built is being torn apart." Esther looked at him without flinching. "Good," she said. Jeremiah met her eyes. Something passed between them, some understanding that went beyond words. Then he nodded. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers," he said. 200 acres. Fair price. You can have your settlement back." Esther May felt something loosen in her chest. Something that had been tight for 30 years. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Jeremiah said. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for me. I'm doing it because I don't want to spend the rest of my life carrying the weight of what she did." I understand, Esther May said. And she did. Naomi Cotton died on July 2, 1865. She passed in her sleep, according to the doctor, though some said she had simply given up. She had learned in her final days that Jeremiah was selling the land that had once been Freeman's settlement. She had tried to stop him, had raged and threatened and pleaded. But Jeremiah had refused to listen. She's my sister, Naomi had reportedly said. How can you give our land to my sister? And Jeremiah had replied, she's your sister. That's exactly why I'm doing it. Esther May did not attend Naomi's funeral. She was not invited, and she would not have gone even if she had been. She had said everything she needed to say to her sister. There was nothing left but the silence. Instead, she spent the day walking the land that would soon be hers again. The fields where Freeman's settlement had once stood. The place where her parents had lived and died. The home she had lost 30 years ago and was finally reclaiming. The sale was completed in August. 200 acres purchased for a price that was fair if not generous. Paid for by a collection of freed people who pooled their resources to buy a piece of their future. They called it New Freeman's Settlement. And Esther May was its founder. The first building they constructed was a school. Esther May had dreamed of opening a school since she was 16 years old. Now, at 62, she finally had the chance. She taught reading and writing to children and adults alike, to anyone who wanted to learn. She told them stories about the old Freeman settlement, about the people who had lived there, about the community that had been stolen from them. And she told them the truth about what had happened. About Naomi. About the betrayal. About everything. Some of them were angry. Some of them wanted revenge. But Esther May taught them what she had learned. Hatred is a chain, she told them. Don't let anyone bind you with it. Not even the people who hurt you most. It wasn't an easy lesson. It wasn't a lesson Esther May herself had fully learned. There were nights when she lay awake thinking about Naomi, thinking about Pearl and Isaiah, thinking about all the years that had been stolen from her. There were nights when the rage burned so hot she thought it would consume her. But she survived those nights, just like she had survived everything else. New Freeman's settlement grew slowly but steadily. By 1870, there were 50 families living there, working the land, building homes, creating something new from the ashes of the old. Esther May was 77 by then, too old to work the fields herself, but still sharp enough to teach, still strong enough to lead. She never married again. Thomas was still alive somewhere, she hoped, though she never found him despite years of searching. But she found other family. She adopted 2 orphan children, a brother and sister named Samuel and Mary, whose parents had died during the war. She raised them as her own, taught them to read, told them stories about Pearl and Isaiah, about the children she had lost. You're their grandmother now, Clara told her one day. They carry your story with them. Esther May smiled. I suppose they do, she said. I suppose that's all any of us can do. Pass our stories on to the people who come after us. She died on March 15, 1873, at the age of 80. She passed peacefully, surrounded by the family she had built in the years after freedom, in the settlement that bore her name. Her last words, according to Samuel, who was holding her hand when she went, were, "Tell them I survived. Tell them we all survived." New Freeman's settlement is still there today. It's called Freeman's Grove now, a small town about 40 miles north of Savannah, Georgia. The school Esther May founded still stands, though it's been rebuilt and expanded many times over the years. There's a statue of her in the town square. A bronze figure of an old woman with her hands raised toward the sky. The plaque at the base of the statue reads, Esther May Whitfield, 1803 to 1873. She survived. And she did. Against all odds, against every betrayal, against 30 years of slavery and a lifetime of loss, Esther May Whitfield survived. Not just physically, though that would have been remarkable enough. She survived spiritually. She survived emotionally. She survived in a way that her sister Naomi, for all her wealth and power, never did. Because Naomi died alone, unloved, her legacy built on lies and blood. And Esther May died surrounded by family, her legacy built on truth and hope. That's the difference between surviving and living. Naomi survived by taking from others. Esther May lived by giving. And in the end, Giving was the only thing that lasted. The story of Esther May Whitfield isn't a story about revenge. It's not a story about hatred. It's a story about something much harder than either of those things. It's a story about grace. Grace to keep going when everything has been taken from you. Grace to build something new when everything you loved has been destroyed. Grace to forgive, not because the people who hurt you deserve it, but because you deserve to be free from the weight of carrying that pain. Esther May never forgave Naomi. She said so herself. But she also never let Naomi's betrayal define her. She took the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turned it into something beautiful. She took 30 years of stolen time and used the years she had left to create a legacy that would outlast them all. And that's the story we wanted to share with you today. If it moved you, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories from history, stories that deserve to be remembered. And as always, thank you for listening.